part of the white enclave. Racism will persist for as long as we continue to use terms like different races as a natural reality, rather than treat it as the social construct it is to create hierarchies of privilege. Statistic SA is continuing to use racial classification in the name of monitoring progress in transformation. I mean, what a kind of travesty of conceptual thinking. Why can't we use geographically? If you tell me about Orange Farm, I know exactly who's living in Orange Farm. You don't have to color code those people. The issue is social justice, not whose color is what. Whiteness in our country is still used as a standard of excellence in performance, knowledge, and power. Let me tell you about another shameful story about my university, where because she was so excellent and woman noch they just couldn't accept her. They had all manner of reasons why she couldn't be promoted to being a full professor. This is the South Africa we still live in. English remains the language of power and privilege in public life. Our politicians speak English in parliament. In a country where the majority of people are indigenous African language speakers. This further marginalizes that majority and undermines their ability to take ownership of the democracy. Superiority and inferiority complexes, anger, rage, violence, public and private in our society are symptoms of a people who are yet to use their talent to develop awareness and pride in themselves so that they themselves can achieve good relations with other people. Mandela inoculated himself against racism by developing his inner spiritual strength and grounding himself on his proud heritage. Still remember his picture at the last appearance in the Treason trial? Regal, royalty, a touch of such a person. He liberated himself from all notions of inferiority, superiority, complexes, and became a powerful leader to liberate even the very people who had imprisoned him. The preamble of our Constitution is a beautiful text, set out there and setting out a program of action that we should have followed. But show me where, one, we are healing ourselves from the wounds of humiliation and divisions of us. Show me where we are intentionally establishing the shared values of Ubuntu, respect for human rights and dignity, social justice, equality for all. Show me where we are acting in a manner that raises the quality of life for everybody, so that everybody's talents are liberated. And of course, even our sovereignty, we put on sale to the shame of our beautiful country. We need to develop programs, and I'm so pleased that Mandela is here. What's the reason why we do not have our constitution and citizenship as part of life orientation in our school curriculum? What's the reason? I've spoken to many university students that have never held a constitution in their heads. And these are not only from public schools, but also from private schools. Let me conclude. Madiba reminded us in his inaugural speech that political freedom is simply the beginning. It provides us with the freedom to build the just society we aspire to. Our capacity to build our reimagined society needs to be liberated by shifting our emotions, spirits, and minds to a new framework of active, confident, responsible citizenship, as enjoined in the preamble of our Constitution. Mindset shift is essential to move us from seeing ourselves as subjects of political and other leaders to become active, responsible citizens, shaping the futures we would like to see. In addition, the transformation of the structures that perpetuate inequalities and inequities is a critical success factor. Our socio-economic development is hampered by the underutilization of the diversity of talents trapped in poverty and despair. Freeing that human potential of all citizens would unleash the creative energies of our youthful population to enable them to become confident, proud, responsible citizens to build ours into a great society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rampere, for that opening remarks. And now I will invite you, Jody, to respond and to make your own additional remarks.
Thanks, Prof.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. I really had to think quite long and hard about how I was going to enter into this conversation, and I thought that the best way for me to do so is to speak a little bit on my personal experience as a so-called born-free growing up in post-apartheid South Africa, and I thought that that was I think a relatively comfortable way for me to segue into this conversation. And I think I'll kick it straight off. So during the early days of democracy and the height of rainbowism, there was a very specific image of Nelson Mandela that was portrayed, a very specific narrative and story that we were taught growing up. And as a so-called born free, I can safely say that I have lived and breathed the legacies of Nelson Mandela and through the ages. Growing up, it was the ideals of the Rainbow Nation that took center stage and was reflected in almost every sphere of South African society when I was younger. His story is one that we all know all too well, and one that we as young South Africans were very proud of growing up. In recent years, however, his legacy has come under severe scrutiny, and many have been rather reluctant to unpack the politics of our first democratically elected president. And I think that that's probably because we as a society, we have idolized Mandela to a point of no return, to a point where we have forgotten and even purposefully erased those who also sacrificed their lives in the struggle against apartheid. I think it is necessary for us to engage with the fact that our struggle narratives solely glorify men. Black women and queer people have been exiled, forgotten, and erased from our narratives of history. Mam Winnie, for example, suffered the brunt of patriarchal violence and erasure. And if I may quote my colleagues Danielle Hofmeister and Khadija Bauer in an article that they wrote in the Huffington Post earlier this year, they said that Mam Winnie was a revolutionary woman in her own right, who was reduced to a mere accessory to Nelson Mandela. They went further on to say that even in the aftermath of violence and persecution, black women in general have received little to no truth or reconciliatory efforts. Mechanisms of truth-seeking actively exclude and overlooked the gender and race-specific struggles that black women endured and still continue to endure. And I think in this critique of Nelson Mandela's legacy, I think young people have definitely been playing an active and very vocal role, particularly when critiquing his role within the political transition of the 1990s. And I think for me personally, when I started critiquing everything that it is that I was taught about Nelson Mandela in my formative years, for me it all started with questions of why. Why things are not what we were promised, why systems of exclusion and structural violence still persist today, why is it that a white elite still owns our economy, the means of production and the means to create knowledge, Why is it that violence, and particularly sexual violence, has become so normalized in our society, or remains so normalized in our society? Why it is that the majority of black and brown people remain landless, disenfranchised, and existing in unending systems of poverty? Those were really questions that were central to my process of conscientization and learning more about the history of my country. Materially speaking, the lives of poor black and brown people have not changed. We remain shackled, excluded, and subjected to violence on all fronts. And it is this lived reality that brings many, including myself, to question the path that we have been walking since 1994, question the decisions that were made, and also question the key players who brought us here. And I think this includes Mandela. And it is at this stage that I'd like to point out that a critique of Mandela's role in our political transition does not necessarily equate to a total rejection of his contribution in the struggle against apartheid, which is often a rebuttal that we are met with when we severely critique his role. If anything, I do believe that it is this very democracy that Mandela fought for and contributed to that warrants us this very opportunity to be even more critical and not just take things as they are. It is within this context of honest critique and difficult conversations